The sky over Manhattan didn't just turn dark on that final Tuesday, it turned violent. At 8:42 p.m. EST, the throngs of tourists in Times Square stopped staring at the towering digital billboards advertising Broadway shows and soda, realizing that the screens had suddenly been outshone by the heavens. A shimmering curtain of emerald green and blood-red light ripped across the zenith, descending impossibly low, swirling around the spires of the Empire State Building like a celestial shroud. It was an aurora borealis of unimaginable intensity, a spectacle usually reserved for the Arctic Circle, now blazing over Midtown. The initial reaction was not fear, but a collective, breath-held gasp of wonder. iPhones were raised, Instagram live streams began, and for 3 glorious minutes, New York City was united in awe. They didn't know they were looking at the death warrant of their species. 300 miles south, at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, Dr. Evelyn Reed was staring at a monitor that was screaming impossibilities. Evelyn, a leading heliophysicist, had spent her career studying solar dynamics, but the data flooding in from the Deep Space Climate Observatory, DSCOVR satellite, was beyond any theoretical worst-case scenario. For decades, scientists had known the Earth's magnetic field, our invisible shield against the sun's lethal radiation, was weakening, and the magnetic poles were drifting. They predicted a geomagnetic reversal over centuries, a slow, manageable migration. They were wrong. The planet's molten iron core had just undergone a catastrophic chaotic spasm. The magnetic poles weren't drifting, they were sprinting. The field wasn't just weakening, it was collapsing. "It's gone," Evelyn whispered to an empty operations room, her voice cracking. "The shield is just gone." At that exact moment, 93 million miles away, the sun, entering an unusually aggressive solar maximum, burped. It wasn't a standard flare. It was an X-class coronal mass ejection of apocalyptic proportions. A billion-ton shotgun blast of superheated plasma and charged particles hurled directly at Earth at 4 million miles per hour. In normal times, Earth's magnetosphere would catch this bullet, deflecting the energy around the planet in a harmless, invisible dance. But tonight, Earth was naked. The first wave hit at 8:46 p.m. EST. This was the electromagnetic pulse component, the vanguard of the storm. Across North America, the effect was instantaneous and absolute. Every copper wire on the continent turned into an antenna, harvesting the massive surge of induced current. In a microsecond, the towering high-voltage transformers that formed the backbone of the U.S. power grid didn't just trip, they liquefied. From the eastern seaboard to Silicon Valley, the lights went out. But this wasn't a normal blackout. It was permanent. In hospitals, backup generators fried instantly as their control circuits overloaded. In the sky, the delicate avionics of 4,000 commercial airliners simultaneously flatlined. The pilots of a Delta flight over Chicago, blinded by the sudden darkness of the cockpit, felt the yoke go dead in their hands as the fly-by-wire systems evaporated. Across the Midwest, aluminum rain began to fall. On the ground, the modern world dissolved. The internet ceased to exist. The global financial markets, existing only as binary code on servers in New Jersey and London, were wiped clean. There was no panic yet, just a profound, confusing silence that settled over the suburbs and cities, broken only by the distant sounds of crashing metal. People stood on their lawns, bathed in the intensifying alien glow of the aurora, holding useless smartphones, unable to Google what was happening. Back at Goddard, Evelyn was one of the few people left with power, thanks to a shielded, deeply buried military-grade generator. She was on a hardened landline with NORAD. The general on the other end sounded terrifyingly calm. "Dr. Reed, our birds are blind. We have zero early warning capability. Are you telling me this is a first strike? General, it's not the Russians or the Chinese, Evelyn said, looking at the latest telemetry from the dying ACE satellite. It's the sun, and the main body of the plasma storm is still 6 hours out. What just hit us was just the muzzle flash. The subsequent hours were a descent into a primal nightmare. As the magnetosphere vanished completely, cosmic rays, high-energy particles from deep space usually blocked by the upper atmosphere, began to sleep down to the surface. The air itself began to taste metallic, sharp with ozone as oxygen molecules were ripped apart. In the densely packed urban centers of the U.S., the panic finally took hold. Without traffic lights, the streets became gridlocked death traps of crumpled metal. Yet people didn't stay in their cars. As the aurora intensified from green to a searing, blinding violet, the temperature began to spike rapidly. It wasn't heat from a fire, it was radiation delivered directly to the skin. People running for cover found that being indoors offered little protection. The very drywall of their homes seemed to hum with energy. Those caught outside in the initial radiation bloom began to vomit within an hour, their skin reddening with instant, deep-tissue beta burns. By 2 a.m. EST, the main body of the CME slammed into the upper atmosphere. This was the killing blow. The sheer kinetic energy of the solar wind hitting the unprotected air was staggering. The atmosphere, our thin blue blanket, began to ignite. From the vantage point of the International Space Station, the 3 remaining astronauts watched in horrific silence. They had already received lethal doses of radiation despite their shielding, but they lived long enough to see the end. They watched as the night side of Earth didn't just glow with city lights, but burned with white fire. The grand temperate forests of North America, dried out by the instantaneous atmospheric heating, flash ignited into continent-spanning firestorms. On the surface, the oceans began to react. The immense energy dumping into the Pacific caused the surface water to flash boil, sending plumes of superheated steam miles into the stratosphere, accelerating the atmospheric stripping. Great hurricanes of hyperheated vapor ripped across the coastlines, stripping cities down to their steel skeletons before melting the skeletons themselves. Evelyn Reed sat on the floor of the Goddard bunker. The air was getting thin, hot, and tasted like copper. The shielded generator had finally failed. Her last sight on the external camera before it melted was the asphalt of the parking lot bubbling like soup. She realized the profound irony of it all. Humanity had spent decades worrying about their own carbon emissions warming the planet by a few degrees over a century. The universe had just decided to warm it by 400 degrees in an afternoon. There were no final words, no grand speeches, no last-minute American ingenuity to reverse the polarity and save the day. It was physics, raw and indifferent. The planet was being sterilized. By dawn on Wednesday, there was no dawn. The sun rose on a blackened, steaming cinder. The great cities of the United States, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, were indistinguishable smears of carbon ash. The oceans were receding cauldrons of boiling mud. The atmosphere was a tattered, escaping wisp of space, bleeding away into the vacuum of space, carrying with it the vaporized remains of absolutely everything that had ever lived. The Earth continued to spin, a scorched rock orbiting a slightly quieter star. The beautiful, terrifying aurora was gone, replaced by the cold, hard vacuum of space touching the dead surface. The silence was total. The Anthropocene epoch had ended, not with a whimper, but in a brief, blinding flash of cosmic violence.